Welcome to another deep dive. This time we're going to be talking about UX research. It's like one of the most important things in modern design, and we've got a ton of sources to like really dig into it. We're looking at user research in UX design, the complete beginner's guide, what is UX research and why user insights are important, user research, what it is and why you should do it, the value of user research, and what is UX research, updated 2024. One thing that just like really blew my mind reading through this stuff was the stat about how like 80% of companies think they know their customers, but only 8% of customers actually agree. That's pretty crazy,
Yeah,
right?
it's a huge disconnect. And that's exactly why UX research is so crucial. It's all about like bridging that gap between what we think we know and what's actually true. Kind of like that whole Samsung thing back in 2005. They did all this research, and it turned out that people actually saw TVs as furniture,
Hmm.
not just like
Yeah.
gadgets, right? And that one insight completely changed their whole design approach.
Yeah.
They started focusing way more on the aesthetics of their TVs, not just the technology.
That's wild. It makes you wonder how many products and services are out there that just like totally missed the mark because they didn't really bother to figure out what their users actually wanted or needed. Like I'm thinking about Google Glass, for example, all that, fancy tech, but it just flopped. Could UX research have saved it?
Well, it's tough to say for sure, but it definitely could have helped them, you know, figure out a clearer user need right from the start. The thing about UX research is that it's all about systematically studying your users, and that means gathering all sorts of data, qualitative and
All right,
quantitative.
hold on. You're throwing some jargon at me here. Can we break that down a little bit? What exactly is qualitative and quantitative data when we're talking about understanding users?
Right, of course. So think of it this way. Qualitative data is all about getting those, really rich, in-depth insights into why people behave the way they do. It's about understanding their motivations, what frustrates them, what their goals are. We gather this kind of data through things like user interviews,
Hmm.
where we just sit down with people and, have a conversation about their experiences. Then on the other hand, you have quantitative data, which is all about the numbers, the hard data. It's about measuring things like how many people click a certain button on a website or how long they spend on a particular page. And we get this data through things like surveys and website analytics.
So it's kind of like getting like both sides of the coin, right? You need both the stories, the qualitative stuff, and the numbers, the quantitative stuff, to really understand how people are using a product or service.
Exactly. It's about getting a holistic picture. And going back to your Google Glass example, maybe they relied too much on the cool factor and not enough on like actually understanding the needs and contexts of their target users.
Hmm.
Qualitative research could have helped them figure out if people really wanted to walk around with a computer strapped to their face all day long.
It's so true. I've definitely bought things that I thought were cool, but then just ended up gathering dust because they didn't actually fit into my life. It's easy to get caught up in the hype, but UX research is about making sure that that product, that thing, actually solves a real problem for people.
Exactly. And, skipping that step can be a huge risk for businesses. I
Yeah.
mean, remember that Bain survey we mentioned?
Oh.
80% of companies getting it wrong. That's a lot of wasted potential.
Right. So how do we avoid that? Let's talk about some specific ways to actually do UX research. What are some methods that you find really useful?
Well, one method that's really great for early stage exploration is guerrilla testing, which is basically just getting some quick, cheap feedback by, doing some street interviews or showing people rough sketches of your ideas and getting their initial reactions.
I love that. Just hitting the streets, getting those raw opinions. It seems like a really accessible way to get user feedback, even if you don't have a big budget or a dedicated research team.
Yeah, totally. It's a low barrier to entry way to test your assumptions and make sure you're on the right track. Then, as you move further along in the design process, you might want to try something like usability testing. This is where you observe how real users interact with the design, whether it's a prototype, a website, a physical product.
Oh, you mean like watching people try to use a website and seeing where they get stuck or frustrated?
Precisely. You're basically looking for those usability issues, those points of friction, that prevent people from having a smooth, enjoyable experience. And there are all sorts of techniques you can use within usability testing, like eye tracking, which literally tracks where people are looking on a screen, or A/B testing, where you compare two different versions of a design and see which one performs better.
So, like with eye tracking, you could see if people are even noticing that important call to action button you spent hours agonizing over. And with AD testing, you could actually measure which design leads to more clicks or conversions. It's like taking the guesswork out of design, right?
Exactly. And these quantitative methods can give you some incredibly valuable data to complement those qualitative insights you get from user interviews and other methods.
It seems like there's just this huge toolkit of UX research methods out there. But how do you know which one to use? It can't be one size fits all, right?
You're right. The choice of method really depends on what you're trying to find out. What stage of the design process you're in. And even practical things like your budget and how much time you have. But, and this is really important, it's not just about doing research once and then being done.
So it's not like checking a box and saying, okay, we did our user research, we're good to go.
Not at all. It's an ongoing process. You test early, you test often, and you keep using those insights to improve your design.
It sounds like a lot of work, but I guess it could save you from a lot of headaches in the long run.
Absolutely. It's like, imagine renovating your entire house without talking to the people who live there, right?
Mm.
You might end up with a beautiful kitchen, but if it doesn't actually work for them, it's a wasted investment.
And a lot of frustration for everyone. I guess user research is kind of like that. It's about making sure you're building something that people will actually use, not just something you think they'll like.
Exactly. And that's where its real value lies.
So, we keep talking about this iterative process, testing and refining designs, but it makes me wonder about all those like best practices you hear about in UX. I mean, things change, trends change, users change, technology changes. So how can we be sure those best practices are still, actually best?
Yeah, that's a good point. Best practices are great, as a starting point, but you shouldn't just follow them blindly. What works for one product or one group of users might not work for another. And that's what's so cool about UX research. It lets us adapt and evolve our designs based on what's actually happening, real world feedback. It's about being flexible, being responsive to whatever your users need.
So it's not about tossing best practices out completely, but more like using them as a foundation.
Yeah.
And then, tailoring them to fit each project.
Exactly. And that's where user research comes in again. It helps us understand those little differences, the specific needs and behaviors that might, be different from the norm, is how we can challenge our assumptions and push the boundaries of what's considered best practice.
So if we're always iterating, always adapting, does that mean a product is never really finished when it comes to UX? It seems like it's just this ongoing process, always improving, always getting better.
In a way, yeah. I mean, the work of a UX researcher is never really done. There's always room to improve, always new insights to be gained, always new ways to make things better for the user.
It's exciting, but also kind of daunting, I guess. It's great to know there's always something new to learn, but it also means you can never just sit back and relax.
Yeah, it's a really dynamic field, and that's what keeps it so interesting. You're always learning, experimenting, refining your approach. It's all about embracing that spirit of continuous learning and growth.
And speaking of learning and growth, one thing I've been thinking about is the communication side of UX research. Like, you can gather all the data in the world, but if you can't explain it to the people who can actually make the changes, what's the point?
Oh, totally. Communication is super important. I mean, it's crucial for any UX researcher. It's not enough to just, collect data. You have to be able to synthesize it, analyze it, and then present it in a way that's clear, concise, and actionable. You have to tell a story with the data, highlight the key insights, and make a strong case for why they matter.
So it's not just about being analytical, it's about being a storyteller.
Yeah,
You have to be able to connect with people, make them care about the user experience.
exactly. And sometimes that means, pushing back against assumptions or advocating for changes that might not be obvious at first. You have to be able to stand up for the user, make sure their voice is heard.
Wow, it sounds like being a UX researcher requires a pretty unique set of skills. You have to be analytical, empathetic, a good communicator, and maybe even a little bit of a diplomat sometimes.
It's definitely a multifaceted role, that's for
Yeah.
sure. And that's what makes it so challenging, but also so rewarding. You get to work at this intersection of, technology, design, and human behavior, and you actually get to make a difference in people's lives.
I'm curious, do you have any stories from your own work that really show the impact UX research can have? Like those aha moments when user insights led to a big change.
Well, one project that comes to mind is this mobile app for a healthcare provider. They were seeing low engagement with a particular feature, and they couldn't figure out why. So we did some user interviews. And it turned out that the language they were using in the app was just too technical, too confusing for a lot of users. People just didn't get what the feature was supposed to do or how to use it.
So the app was basically designed from the perspective of healthcare providers, not the patients who were actually using it.
Exactly. Once we saw that, we worked with the design team to simplify the language, make the instructions clearer, add some visuals, and you know what? Engagement with the feature went way up. And more importantly, patients felt more empowered to manage their own healthcare.
That's amazing. It shows how user research can uncover those tiny details, those things that seem small but make a huge difference in the user experience. It's all about getting into your users' heads and seeing the world from their perspective.
Yeah, and sometimes those small details have the biggest impact. It's about paying attention to the little things, you know, the nuances of language, the way people interact with technology, even their emotional responses.
Speaking of emotional responses, not all user research is going to be positive, right? Sometimes you're going to find problems, things that are hard to hear. How do you deal with that?
It's true, you don't always get the answers you want. Sometimes the research shows, uncomfortable truths about a product, but you have to remember, your role is to be objective, to present the findings as they are, and then work with everyone to find solutions.
So it's not about hiding the bad news, but using it as a chance to grow and improve.
Exactly. It's about using research as a tool for positive change, even if that means having tough conversations or challenging assumptions.
It sounds like there's a real art to all of this, balancing being an advocate for the user with being a partner to the design team.
It's definitely a learning process, but at the end of the day, it's all about making the best possible experience for the user.
And that's something I think we can all get behind. Technology should serve people, not the other way around.
Well said.
This whole conversation has really opened my eyes to UX research. It's so much deeper than I thought. It's not just asking people what they want. It's about truly understanding them and using that understanding to create designs that are human-centered.
I'm glad to hear that. It's
Yeah.
a field that often gets, misunderstood, but its impact is huge.
So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, is there anything else you'd like to highlight? Any key takeaways for our listeners?
I think the most important thing to remember is that user research is a journey. It's about asking questions, being curious, always trying to understand the people you're designing for, and embracing that whole process of testing, learning, and improving.
It's about being a lifelong learner, right?
Absolutely.
It's really interesting to think about how, all this user-centered stuff can actually go beyond just like designing websites or apps. Where else are you seeing UX research make a difference?
Well, honestly, I think its principles can be applied to just about anything, any field, any industry. I mean, at its core, it's about understanding people.
Right.
And that's relevant no matter what you're designing, whether it's a physical product or a service, or even just like, how you communicate with people.
It's a whole way of thinking, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about putting yourself in the shoes of the people you're trying to reach
Hmm.
and really understanding like their perspective, their goals, what's holding them back.
I was just thinking about education. Like, what if teachers used a UX research mindset to plan their lessons? They could get feedback from students, see what's working, what's not, and change their teaching methods based on that.
That's a great example.
Hmm.
Or think about healthcare. UX research can help make hospitals and clinics more patient-friendly, easier to navigate, less stressful.
And even in our personal lives, right? We're always using products and services. So we could all probably benefit from being a bit more user-centered in our everyday lives.
Absolutely. It's about being more aware of the experiences we create for other people,
Hmm.
our families, our friends, even just random people we meet.
Okay, so let's say someone is listening to this and they're really interested in UX research, but they don't, work in design or anything like that. What advice would you give them? How can they start using these ideas in their own work or life?
Well, the first step is just to start paying attention. Observe how people interact with the world around them. What frustrates them? What do they need? What are they like hoping for, even if they don't say it out loud?
So it's about being curious, empathetic, trying to see things from other people's points of view.
Exactly. And don't be shy about asking questions. Talk to people, listen to their stories, try to understand what motivates them.
It sounds like it's really about changing your mindset, being more deliberate and thoughtful in how you interact with the world.
And the best part is, you don't need any special tools or anything. It's just about being present, being observant, and being open to learning.
I gotta say, this whole conversation has been really eye-opening for me. I feel like I have a much better grasp of what UX research is and how powerful it can be.
I'm glad to hear that. It's something I'm really passionate about. And I truly believe that, its principles can make a real difference.
Well, I think that's a great place to wrap up our deep dive. Thanks so much for sharing your insights with us today. It's been awesome.
You're welcome. I always enjoy talking about UX research.
And to all our listeners, we hope you enjoyed this exploration of UX research. We encourage you to, check out those sources we mentioned and start thinking about how you can use a more user-centered approach in your own life. Remember, it's all about understanding people, and that's a valuable skill no matter what you do. So until next time, stay curious.